And a very good evening from you all. From Dubai, I'm Nadine Pari, executive and leadership coach and a workplace mediator. And tonight, I am welcoming Trudy West. Good evening, Trudy.
Hello, Nadine. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And thank you so much for accepting to be my guest today. Would you like to share with the rest of the world who you are, Trudy?
So I'm Trudy West. I'm a professor at practice at Ashridge Executive Education. And I work with leaders, usually in groups, either intact or teams or from an organisation. And I work with them to help them think about what kind of leader do they need to be, given the context, given who they are, their values, their beliefs. So to explore some of those things and then test their assumptions and how would you change that? What do you do differently to get more out of life, I suppose, as well as leadership?
Wow. And we've actually never met, but we connected on LinkedIn because I posted one of my millions of posts on difficult conversation, managing difficult conversation, and the fact that I was working on a PhD, and I'm exploring the role of hope in managing difficult conversation. And you messaged me privately to say that you thought that it was very exciting, and then we started having a conversation, and then here we are today.
Yes.
So the connection was the hope and managing the conversation. So I'm ever so grateful for you to have written me that message on the 23rd of December, I think it was. Because, we're now in February and we are connecting. So thanks for that.
No, you're welcome. It really just struck me what you're looking at, and just from such a human perspective, I don't know, it really resonated for me. So yeah, I'm really pleased I did.
But today we thought we would be talking about trust. We would be talking about risk and choice. And when behind the scene, you and I, we agreed on that title, I have to say that I didn't think too much. I thought those are three wonderful words that are going very well together. It's a little bit like a formula. Do you want to explain, or perhaps share why those three words? Why did you say yes to those, and why did you?
So I've been looking at so through my research across the years, what has felt like different bits of research. So I looked at a sailing race around the world yacht race. I've looked at how do people think about and deal with risk. I've looked at integrity under pressure and how that can lead to hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Amongst other things. And then now my doctorate, so I'm looking at trust. So I'm looking at trust in self and how to develop trust in self and with other. So what happens between us as we're sort of moving around in anything, life, organization, whatever. And then as I've been exploring trust in self, I realize more and more how my risk research or my understanding of risk from my risk research completely fits in with it. Because a lot of the times trust, the opposite of trust is you're at risk. So if you don't think you have trust or that you can trust that person, you leave yourself exposed, potentially, either actually or you perceive it. And just the perception of it alone can lead to doubt. It can lead to friction. So the sort of moral or physical impediment to action, just not trusting and the sort of tap of potential risk means it stops us making a decision or acting into something or letting something go because you've trusted someone else to do it. When you want to have trust and you haven't quite got it, it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And it takes away choice because you're then, I'm often saying, the gap between the burning platform and the data set. So we have data, we look for data, we have enough, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough data, when actually we probably have enough. But then we wait for the burning platform to actually choose to do something because either the risk is too far or the trust is not enough. So those three things are coming out now in my inquiry. So it's a first person inquiry and then leading into second person inquiry. But how does that actually show up for us in our day-to-day. And then through my inquiry, I'm now working, I know as I always have, with others to help them kind of go, what's really at risk here? What if I trusted? And what stops me trusting? And all of that takes time and energy. And that's where I'm interested.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the word risk and the word trust. It's not because you're taking a risk, even if something goes wrong, that you should stop trusting yourself.
Yeah.
So it's giving yourself permission to make mistakes, and and at the same time continuing to trust yourself. It's a learning.
Because with trust in yourself, I have found, I'm experiencing as I'm sort of experimenting and developing, it's not the mistake that I fear. I don't fear mistakes. That's not my driver. I, as such, I don't mind making a decision and being wrong, but without the trust in myself and or other, I then go all through every single iteration because I don't want to miss something. I don't want to have thought I make a mistake because I just didn't consider a risk. And it's a nuanced thing, but it's given everything that you have in front of you, making a decision, a choice, and that is the best decision that you could have made. And there's no right or wrong, and there's no good or bad. It just is. And it not working out for whatever reason, that I think people can live with. For given everything I had available to me, this is the choice that I made. But I think where people, and by people I mean me, but also the people I work with, spend a lot of energy thinking, have I considered everything? Because, and often it's a fear of judgment, either of yourself or someone else's judgment, that if it comes to light that a decision gets made and it doesn't work out, that you were amiss in some way, or that you didn't really do your job, or you didn't really, and it's not about making an error, it's not being able to justify it.
Do you think that when we are talking about risk and when we are examining the possibilities of the number of risk, do you think that actually it is slowing us down to a point that we are standing still?
Yes.
And therefore, at that moment, trust in ourselves doesn't even exist because we are focusing on something else and we're not thinking about ourselves?
Yes. And to go back to that word, friction. So this came from the sailing research, actually, and it came from the military research. And it's a really sort of old word, and it links to the sort of friction of, materials rubbing together. It slows you down or it warms you up, literally you rub things together. But in the literature, the word friction is a moral or physical impediment to action. So either because you and I are in conflict, we have friction between us, or I have doubt, or I'm overthinking, or I just don't know what to do, and someone's expecting me to know what to do, for example. And of course, this is all transposed on to the people that I'm working with, and this is the work that we do together. So every time I think I know what I should be doing, but I don't actually quite know for certain because I don't quite trust either myself or other, or don't feel trusted in that exchange, that every bit of friction, the sort of moral impediment, the moral kind of obligation to act or do, it creates an impediment. So it slows us down. So the whole should I, shouldn't I? Should I? Each one of those takes away time, but kind of more importantly, takes away energy. Because if you're constantly having to think, oh, this or that, and this is a slightly separate thing to that living in a VUCA world where we just don't know. This, of course, there is a VUCA world, an ambiguity or a complexity. But I'm kind of getting a bit of a hunch that to some degree, yes, but it's not all VUCA. Some things are just too much, and when there's too much expectation, too much to consider for any one kind of person to deal with, and it isn't always VUCA or complexity. Sometimes it's just a too high volume of things to consider in any one moment. So that, I think that is something it just through my inquiries, working out, is this actually a complex thing, or is this just too much? Where do I kind of simplify things, and where is my anxiety trying to simplify things because it's too complicated? So all of it's in the mix, and none of it's easy, but just developing that greater understanding of who you are, how you tick, what some of the narratives are, and help develop the capacity to even notice some of this stuff. And that's what I'm really interested in. I love that sort of space for people when they see themselves in action not necessarily for the first time, but with reflection, they're able to go, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. I can see it now. I can see it for myself.
I want to ask you a question, because you said, you mentioned trusting yourself, so trusting ourselves and trusting others. It's two different things, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which one can you live with, and which one can you live without? What is the
that's a really good question. Because there comes a point, if you only trust yourself and you don't trust anybody else, then that becomes hubris. That becomes, I know myself and I don't trust you. But I think through and it depends on your mindset and your background and how you've been brought up and all sorts of, so that is complicated, or actually complex. But I think without that inherent the developed sense of trust in self, it is easier to always trust someone else. And I think there comes a point where if you don't trust yourself and you only trust others, it leaves you vulnerable. Yeah. It leaves you gullible to some degree, or potentially gullible. So of course it depends. But if it comes to the point where you're having to constantly justify your own self because you'd rather, how do I explain that? If all you're doing is trusting someone else and you don't trust them somewhere deep down, but you've decided to, it takes a lot of energy to have to kind of quieten your own doubt about either them or you. So really having a good understanding of yourself and that trust in self ultimately leads to more trust in other people.
Do you think? Yeah, go on.
So I was going to say, and ultimately, it's my trust in you, but as importantly as and it's different. It's not necessarily one in exchange for the other. It's also your trust in me. I was reading as part of my work I'm doing for my doctorate. We were sharing each other's essays, and I was reading one of my colleagues' cohort's essay, and in it said a line, I flourish when I'm trusted. She'd written, I spoke to a colleague and they said, I flourish when I'm trusted. Gosh, that really resonates with me. That really, I really do flourish. If I feel like there's a trust there, I just perform at such a much higher level than if I think there's doubt in someone else's mind. And whether it's true or not is that's the next layer. And when we were chatting about it, I said, oh, there was a line in your essay that really caught me. I just really resonated with me. She said, oh, what line was that? And I said, oh, it's the line about I flourish when I'm trusted. It really resonated with me. And she went, it was you that said it. And I was like, what? And she said, it was you that said it. You said it. I just quoted you. And I didn't even realize I'd said it. We were chatting about something and that was that. But so so developing that capacity to recognize someone else's trust in you.
Yeah.
So you can have trust in self and not trust someone else. You can have their trust in you and not trust yourself. Then obviously the ideal goal would be that you have trust in each other and whatever goes on between you.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you know, so somebody, you think somebody trusts you, and then you have this moment when you realize that actually they don't, or vice versa. You know,
Yes.
that moment when you understand that actually the judgment isn't right.
Yes.
Either way, okay? How do we know that? At what moment do we know that?
Well, this is kind of the next layer down. This is when it can, I think, I've described it before as being like in a hall of mirrors. You know, sometimes it's actually a mirror, sometimes it's perspex and the mirror is beyond, and sometimes it's nothing, and you'll sort of have to find your way and basically don't run, because anywhere you can kind of run up against things, because actually there's just as likely a chance as your perception of their judgment can be something old of yours. A look that you get from somebody that you used to get from somebody else. And so developing that capacity so there's the meta awareness that you're having the thought.
Yeah.
That, oh, I'm feeling judged. And then the reflexivity to go, hang on a second. Am I, is that true? Or am I perceiving something that's, there may be something going on for them, but does it necessarily relate to what I'm doing? And I think over time, when you spend enough time with someone, you can and that's the data, isn't it? You kind of go, this has happened before, like a comment or a look or, a small subtle change in behavior that is, this is moving into territory of like psychological safety of just, I don't feel quite a look or something passes or one off. The chances are it's not. The chances are it's related to something else. But of course, if it keeps happening or something similar, or there's a thread of something that you feel over time, this has happened before. Like I've experienced this with this person.
Yes.
And then ultimately, you've got a decision. If that data is there, that you have enough of a thing of an eye roll, I often talk about the sort of the very subtle eye roll that you can have, and you think, oh God, I've overstepped the mark, or I've gone on too long, or or whatever. And depending on who's there and the power at play, but I think ultimately we're still responsible for ourselves. We have to have that conversation, and it may or may not be true. But if we do feel we have enough kind of data in our gut, we can't hold on to it and kind of complain about it in our heads and go, oh, they always do this to me. But and that's with the next layer is the capacity to then say, I've noticed sometimes that it was my experience is this, whatever the word is, but the difficult conversations that you're looking at, it's our responsibility to have that conversation or choose not to. But I find, so for myself and lots of people that I'm working with, it's just like, but having the conversation, I know it, I've got the data, and then we explain it away as something else rather than have the conversation.
Yeah, but you seem to imply, you seem to imply that the trust is something that grow over time, right?
Yes.
But actually, and something. So we observe all the time. We observe as leaders. We observe people all the time. But you and I, we know that we have very long days, and our capacity to observe can be very different depending on what the context, the people we're with, the environment, the noise, everything, the colors, everything. Okay. What if we don't see something and then we are taken by surprise?
I suppose that you have to take it for what it is in that moment, because obviously you haven't got the data set and suddenly the platform's burning and you've got something in front of you that you have to find a way. I've had it in moments before where I've worked with someone, that I trust and we have a good relationship, but in the moment something's been said as a joke or as a British word, banter, a bit of banter in that moment, but it's not appropriate for this room or this whoever we're with, client wise or whatever. And I have had that moment of feeling totally sort of I don't know how to act because if it was just you and I in a room, I would tell you how I feel because we have that kind of relationship. But it's happening almost with an audience. So, you know, sort of, I've had that moment of, I would never have expected that. And now with a group of people with us, and I've been totally flummoxed. I've really not known what to do. And then the risk is it builds in your mind so that when you do have a chance, when you're together, and you say, you know, and you'd like to give the feedback in a nice format that you learnt in a business school somewhere about this is how you give feedback, and you base it on your own and, you know, your experience of behavior, you know, and all that lovely stuff. But in that moment when you're feel embarrassed, and I think that's a lot of what can happen when trust is unsettled, is embarrassment. A, because I trusted you and you've let me down, or you've underestimated, or whatever. And in that embarrassment, the little kernel can grow into something much bigger. And so by the time you actually say it, your planned, lovely, you know, 2x2 matrix of giving feedback that you learned, as I say before, goes out the window. If you're not able to kind of go, hang on a second, I'm feeling embarrassed. And the inferencing ladder can go all the way up, and then just to bring it back, what actually happened, what was said, and then you can, what's your assumed intention, and I mean, off we go into another world.
You're talking about embarrassment, but I think that for some people it's more bereavement, because you trust somebody and suddenly you feel massively let down. It's like quite critical, and you're very emotional. So it's much stronger than embarrassment, because you were holding that person, you know, very highly, and suddenly it's brutal.
Yes.
It's broken.
And I think so on the flip side of it, if you've ever been the one to make a comment that without malice, but it has been received badly, I think just to remember not to say, oh, I didn't mean it, or I was only joking, or I'm sorry if that upset you. It's like, it upset them, you know, like there's no if. Like, so just because I call that Schrodinger's intention. So Schrodinger's cat, where you put a cat in a box. This is not necessarily recommended. It's just a philosophical exercise. Cat in a box, have to treat it both as if it's alive and dead, for such time until you lift the lid off, and then you have the facts of whether it is alive or dead. But until that point, you treat it as both. And Schrodinger's intention is whatever you think and feel and say and do, and whatever I think and feel and say and do, are both true according to our reality, until such time as you lift the lid and have the conversation. But if you're never prepared to lift the lid and have the conversation, particularly if you're never going to see them again, you just go your separate ways, and that's that. With an ongoing relationship, be it family or work or colleague or client or participant, that, you know, whatever the relationship, you have me deciding what the other person was thinking and me deciding what their intention was. All I can do is focus on what I have in my version of the cat. And unless I'm prepared to lift the lid and have a conversation, all I'm doing is creating a whole narrative around this. And that really just reinforces things that aren't always helpful, typically.
Yeah, and it's exhausting, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's exhausting.
It's draining. And when you're a leader, you can't afford actually to go into that mode and into that mindset, because it's quite destructive.
Yeah.
And it goes against you being a great leader, because you're digging a hole and you can't get out of it. So what can we do to have trust in ourselves then? I mean, is it easy? Is it, you know, you've got some people who are very confident, they totally trust, you know, themselves, they would take risk, they would go for it. And then you've got the opposite of people who doubt everything, don't take risk, not sure, and therefore don't make the most and miss opportunities. So what can we say to those people who know that they don't trust themselves, but actually they'd like to change. They'd like to trust themselves a little bit more. What can we give them in terms
Well,
of?
I mean, there's lots of different answers I could give. One of the things that I think I am coming to know about, so you said about some people trust themselves, they'll take the risk, they'll do that, and other people don't. And actually, just from my inquiry, and myself, but also with other people, is it's so much more complex than that, because so for myself, on one hand, I'm very confident. I can do things that other people go, oh, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that. And I'm like, I don't really, it doesn't, like, it comes naturally, or it's easy. I don't think of it as confident or brave. I just think it's part of how I am. But then there are other things that people, when I've spoken about, that they cannot believe that I feel difficult or awkward, or I find, challenging. Like, but you can do all those things. Why can't you do that? And then, and that's what happens with the leaders I'm working with. On one hand, very successful risk taking, or able to evaluate risk and work through and leading highly complex teams. But you ask them to do something quite simple, and often I do in the work that I do with them. So I've got a sort of working, I call them breaching experiments, small things you can do that on the face of it are harmless, nothing, in the perception of risk, there is no death and destruction or financial ruin. So what's the worst that could happen? But as you ask them, like, would you experiment doing this? There's this genuine kind of, nope, never going to happen. Like captains of industry that won't swap sides of the bed, for example, just as an experiment, or and I've said this before, but go to dinner by yourself, but without a book or a phone, and just be a nice restaurant, not McDonald's, or not that McDonald's is nice, it's lovely, but somewhere where there are some etiquette and social kind of expectations. And when we come back together again after, and there's a whole series of things you can do, small things, I describe them as itchy armpit moments, and make you kind of go, oh no, because in those moments, what is actually at risk and what is my perception of the risk? And often it's embarrassment, or that's not what people do, or that's not what people like me do, or I will look silly, or I will look. And then you realize, well, actually we don't know what other people think about us. All we know is how we see ourselves, but it gives you an insight into how you might be projecting what other people. So often we'll work through that, and that's how I sort of came through a lot of developing trust in self, working out the bottom line of so often we talk about values and beliefs, but really doing the work to test some of the assumptions around that, of what is it actually, and how much of it is linked to what does it look like, because with that core understanding of yourself under pressure and when you think no one is looking, so that's how I define integrity, you're much more able to say, this is what I think. Now I could be wrong, but actually this is what I think. Before I was doing the inquiry work and the breaching experiments, I'd think to myself, this is what I think. But then when I came to say it out loud, I would undermine my message with things like, I mean, it could just be me, but I could be wrong, or and would discount, or not even say, because who am I to have an opinion about this thing? There's other people that know so much more, and of course they do, or they might. But learning to trust the sort of inner narrative, that little voice in your head that says, should you be doing this? And just getting a colleague of ours, a colleague and friend of mine, Steve Chapman, talks about getting to know your inner critic, learning to dance with your inner critic, and treating your inner critic as if they're a flatmate that you've ended up living with, some difficult flatmate. Actually, once I got closer to understanding that little voice, which has been super helpful. Sometimes my little inner voice is just one of my biggest cheerleaders. Now and again, they just think, keep things a bit safe. And actually, sometimes if I, and it's metaphorically, and it's a thought experiment, but sometimes I can just say to my inner critic, it's okay, I've got this. And they kind of go, okay then. But if I listen to the inner critic and I'm like, oh, have I got it? I don't know. Then almost inevitably, I won't. In the past, I won't do it. I'm still learning. And I bring this into the work with people that I'm working with. And it sounds very sort of esoteric, but really it's just quite pragmatic. What makes you feel uncomfortable, tuning into that inner critic or just the inner narrative? When is that instinct? And when is that doubt? It's fine. It's a fine line to kind of tune into.
Yeah. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I'm actually away on business at the moment. I could decide to go to a restaurant on my own without a phone, without a newspaper, and suddenly I'm thinking, what would I be looking at? And then the inner critic could be, what will people think of me being on my own? And then the judgment.
Yes.
Am I on my own because I'm not happy? And when the inner critic tends to be quite negative, doesn't it? It's like the glass is half empty. And I guess the strength and the I don't know if it's rigor, but it's how do you shift that? Every time that little voice says something negative to you or puts you, off track, at what point do you still have control over that to bring you back and just say, no, it's okay, I can go out and eat on my own and no phone, and I'll survive. It's actually quite a discipline, isn't it, to say, stop behaving like that. Just it is a discipline.
Most of the work is tuning into it, and that's why I do the breaching experiments, is to kind of create a container, if you like, for almost bringing it out. So I do things on purpose that I know are relatively straightforward, simple, but make me kind of go, do I have to do this? And then doing it just so that I can almost bring out the inner critic. And then what's really important with the sort of emotional learning, where you're experiencing things and then it's bringing up emotions, is to make time for the reflection afterwards. Because without it, it's just something that happens. So then what I do is I then spend some time reflecting on it. I do a lot of free fall writing, and I build that into my programs. And often people are like, wow, the first thing I wrote about is the thing I always think about. And it was the second and the third thought that I've never thought about before. So through that reflection, I then kind of go back into what was the narrative of the inner critic at that time. And in the cold light of day, you kind of go, well, that's ridiculous. Like, what? Or not ridiculous necessarily, of, I can see where that might have come from, but of course it isn't necessarily true. And then when I then have that experience again, I've already done it once, and I can kind of go, oh, that's that version of the inner critic. There are different versions. And I've already done the thinking that isn't necessarily true. So in that moment, I'm able to go, I know where you're going with this, but on this occasion, I think I'm okay. And the more I've done that across time with these different little experiments, and I said they don't have to be big, but importantly, at the moment you're doing them, it's not a public thing. It's something that's private, because it can very easily click into being something you do for other people to go, oh, she's doing one of those experiments again. Oh, I'm going to do this thing, everybody. And that's a different thing. That's a performative, which is fine. It's recognizing what role does performance play in being able to get through discomforting or uncomfortable things. I mean, this is getting quite nuancy, but that is important, because if you can do it because people are watching you, or you've got a bit of an audience,
Yeah.
pay attention to that, because what else don't you do when you don't have an audience? You know,
Right.
like, well, that's just hard work,
Yeah.
and no one's here to see me, so I'm not going to do it.
Mm.
It kind of works better if you're doing the little experiments that, you know, make you feel, and they can be almost anything, and often happen unbidden. So
Yeah.
we were working with a group. I was working with a group, and it had been quite a challenging program. It'd been designed to be stretching and putting them under pressure. And I'd said, you know, expect some itchy armpit moments, you know, those kind of,
Mm.
and they were super trusting, and we did all sorts of things. And at the end of it, I gave them an art box, because half the group across the week had discovered are really quite creative and really enjoyed every time they talked in images. And so I
Mm-hmm.
thought, well, as we were doing the sort of closing part, I said, look, for some of you, I think this might be helpful for help you think about to scaffold
Yeah.
your kind of next steps. And I brought these big these big boxes, and one of the guys, and you know, half the group, you know, laying on the floor, drawing things and speaking things. And but one guy came up to me and said, I mean, really, Kurt, why are we doing this? I don't understand. Why? And I said, well, because I mean, honest, I said, you can go for a walk, you can write 5 books, and I'd been clear about, I don't really care how you do it,
Yes. Sure.
whatever works.
Mm.
And art is for children. Art is for children. And I said, well, go for a walk, or, you know. And he went, no. And it really caught my phony bone at the time. And I was trying to be, because he said, no, I'm going to step in, because we, different points in the week, we're like, you know, step into the discomfort.
Mm.
And then he came up to me after and said, I'm so sorry. Like, it just
Yeah.
really brought up the narrative for me as a child of, you're no good at art, don't
Mm.
do this, don't do that. He said, and what else has that message meant I've not done
Mm.
because of that? Someone in the past saying, you're not good at this. What else have
Mm.
I avoided doing until this point?
Yeah, I guess it's about knowing yourself, isn't it? Of what makes you comfortable to be able to, you know, when you are reflecting,
Yes.
in what way are you reflecting that's work for you?
Yeah.
It's interesting because when you were talking about the writing, I'm thinking, oh, I used to write many, you know, journaling, um, and actually now with technology, I'm more into recording, because
Right.
I find it's easier to actually speak, you know, on my iPhone, and just record the moment, as opposed to, if you're writing, okay, I need a notebook, I need a pen. You could argue, well, you can do that on your phone, but it's not the same.
Because
So
with the
it's about
thing,
knowing yourself, knowing
yeah,
what's best for you, and it's very different, isn't it? Depending,
yeah.
like this guy who said, trauma of childhood, I'm not drawing, thank you very much.
And how this links to risk is in those moments when you've got the narrative of, consciously or not, of, you're not good at this, you know, you can't do this, the inner critic, either from the past or wherever. And what can happen, and I have seen happen, is the organization is used as the excuse to limit the risk and mitigate and collapse things down to a simple solution, or let's say no, or let's, you know, whatever, manage the risk in a tight way rather than leaving it kind of a bit more looser
Yes,
for things to emerge. And of
yes.
course, this is, if there is actual death and destruction and financial ruin, mitigate. You know, there's no two ways about it. This is a different thing.
Yes.
But with that inner voice guiding us, if we're not conscious of it, we can very easily use organizational structures to mitigate the risk, when actually the risk is our anxiety.
Yes.
And I've argued before that I think anxiety is already a governance mechanism in organizations. I think that it is already embedded in, because we don't want to be judged. We have to demonstrate why we've made our decision. We have to be able to justify when we make our decisions. That comes with a burden of proof, evidence, and particularly if you're, you know, evidence-based decisions. It's like, no, inspiration-based evidence. You know, there's a difference. And so if you're not tuning, if I'm not tuning in to my inner critic and my kind of not natural, my perhaps not trusting myself, of course I can argue for keeping things safe in the organization, particularly if I have power, particularly if I have a mindset that may be data driven from my technical days. If I was an engineer, or if I, and I have a very strict data set mindset. As a leader, that will feed into how I look at what I measure, what I count, what matters, coupled with some anxiety around performance and not trusting. And then we end up with these very kind of tight with processes that don't always make sense because they're based on someone's anxiety, not on what we're actually trying to manage in terms of risk.
We have somebody actually making a comment, Trudy. Somebody's saying, and it says LinkedIn user, so I don't know. That person says, we may have beliefs that hold us back that we are not consciously aware of.
I was writing, so when I was journaling once, letting beliefs get in the way of believing. And that was a really powerful moment of realizing, just when you have such strong beliefs, as if it is true. So I talk about beliefs as opinions I treat as fact. So this is an opinion that I treat as if it's a fact. And if I have such a strong belief about you, or about a certain type of person, or a certain race or gender, or anything, those beliefs will get in the way of believing their lived experience.
Yes. Oh, it's David Jackson. Okay. Hi, David. Thank you very much. Yes. I think it is about knowing yourself and being quite rigorous about when that little voice is starting to take you off track and where you shouldn't be going. It's having the strength, really, and the courage to say, actually, no, let's not go there. But it's also about getting into the habits of developing that trust in yourself, because I guess the first time you are writing and trying to understand the trust in yourself, it's not really easy to do as an exercise, is it? When you're on your own and where do you start, right? For you and I mean, we are quite academic, so we know where to start. But if you are on your own, you've never done that exercise, and you think, okay, I'd quite like to trust myself more. Where do I start? It's not easy. You do need to have some guidelines, somebody to help you start, and then get into the habit of doing it, isn't it? Because the first time you do it, it's never going to be the same, is it?
No, it is difficult. And I think that's where my practice has been shifting over the last 2 years since I've been. So the actual work I do hasn't really changed, but the emphasis has been changing as I've been doing my doctorate around. I can share with you all sorts of models about, I don't know, resilience or emotional intelligence, or how to give feedback, or, the content-y side of things. But the bottom line of it is, unless you have some of the capacity to experiment, to do something different, to reflect on that, to be able to build into your practice the rigor that you need to be able to really do the work, to really understand what makes you tick, what sends you off, what excites you, where you end up doing a job or parts of a job that you just, there was parts of my job that I was doing a couple of years ago that, frankly, I didn't enjoy, I wasn't very good at, and I was a bit of a risk, actually. The stuff that is not, I'm not particularly good at it. It doesn't excite me, usually around sort of planning and organizing. And through the inquiry, I was just like, being able to say, is that career limiting if I didn't do that? And then being told, well, no, just lots of people quite like doing that. But no, if you don't like, not only do I not like it, I think I'm a bit of a risk, actually. And having the compassion for myself to recognize that, but the trust in myself to know that if I took that away, this part of the work or the expectation, the relief of being able to go, okay, now if I'd been told, no, it's absolutely fundamental to be able to do what you do, well, then I have a choice to make. Do I develop that? But unless you're doing the work to really be able to either test the assumptions about what you know and what you don't know, and this is not about having lots of knowledge, it's just having a sense of yourself and the capacity to have the conversations that you need to have, you'll end up in a spiral of just doing the same old without really having the chance to flourish, like trusting yourself. So I flourished when I trusted, and that includes myself, was the name of my last paper. I mean, that's as you say, that sounds very academic, but the PhD is a means to an end of getting this real kind of depth of practice and experimenting with people to make life better for ourselves. So for me and for the people I'm working with, that's my goal, is so that at the end of it, 2 years, 6 months, 2 weeks down the line, they're able to make a choice about something and kind of have a real sense of themselves around what they know about themselves and what risk actually looks like. Rather than I see, and I have been, but I see people I work with kind of tied in knots where they kind of know, but they don't, and they do trust themselves, but they're caught up in an organization that they can't, they don't know how to begin demonstrating that.
As I'm thinking about my diary, I'm thinking, I feel like making an appointment with myself, where you define specific moment and actually you establish routine.
Yes.
Where you reflect on your self-awareness,
yes.
on your trust. And you mentioned, you don't need knowledge. I actually may disagree with that, because I think that if we are not asking ourselves the right questions, then we may waste our time. So we do need a bit of knowledge. We do need to ask ourselves the right questions, don't we?
Yes.
And not everybody has those questions.
I think asking the right question, so I have the extreme privilege of working with some fabulously clever people. So I work with who are world experts in their field. And the dark side is I also work with some fabulous people that are real experts in their field. So my understanding of their topics are never going to be as deep as their understanding of their topic. And if I were to make, what do I know about it? Well, I'm never going to know as much as they know. And actually the framing or the knowledge, to me, it's like a menu or a recipe, or it's what do I need that's going to be helpful, asking the right questions, having not right makes it sound like there's a one way or another, for me or for whoever I'm working with, rather than you can read every single book and not know anything. You can have one thing that kind of catches you sideways and you kind of go, that, and creating the space for that to happen, even if we don't ever know what that's going to be, but creating the space for that, for whatever to happen. To say the knowledge and the content side of things, it scaffolds it. But it's, what's the expression? It's necessary but not sufficient.
Because sometimes we actually hold the answer, don't we, in ourselves? We don't need books, do we?
Yes.
I think it's really interesting what you've just said about books, because if you look on, Amazon or wherever, there's millions of books on trust and risk and choice.
Yeah.
Yet the simple answer, just may be in yourself.
Yes. And I think that, because I had an experience a few years ago, which has probably kind of prompted the inquiry of finding myself in a situation where I knew like here, but I didn't let myself trust myself, because the other version of it that I could tell myself was much more compelling. But the amount of effort each and every day that I had to put in to tell myself the story, to try and ignore what I knew deep down, so that once it all came to light, it was like, I knew that.
Yeah.
I knew it. So it wasn't like I was naive. It wasn't like, I knew deep down, I told myself a very compelling story. I call it accommodation, where you tell yourself a story to live with what otherwise would be unacceptable. And what really pinched was when a really good friend of mine said, and you of all people, perceptive, understands people, work, psychology, whatever. And it was, and when in my subsequent conversations with people, and obviously people I work with, most people already know. They just don't know how to justify themselves. And then the downside is, and sometimes you feel like you already know because your inner critic is telling you, and it's then differentiating between what is keeping you safe from the inner critic, which is no mean feat. I think the inner critic is our friend. They just get a little bit nervous sometimes. If you're out of your comfort zone, they're not ready for what you're about to do, or you're tired, or you're emotional, and that's when they kind of go, okay, we better double down. But actually, the inner critic, I think we need to find another word, because actually, I think that little inner voice is a fabulous resource, and that's what I'm playing with. And that's what I'm really kind of working with people, just to tune into, because it's there. And there's sort of the people that might call this soft and fluffy, which I often get, or not, I don't, but people say, there's this soft stuff, like the stuff of humans, the stuff of like that stuff. Yeah, that stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel concrete, but actually it's probably more than any spreadsheet or data set or, book frame, book model, open a book and get a lovely 2x2, which I love, but they have to be embodied. They have to be lived. You can't just go, I now know, because we're not taking exams and tests anymore. And this is life.
We talked about that inner critic. But there's one thing we've not talked about, and I've just thought about it, which is intuition.
Yes.
I mean, is intuition part of that inner critic, or is it something?
I think it is. This is why I'm thinking it needs another word, because I think, or either there are a couple of people having a party back there, but I'm a big fan. So a lot of my inquiry work and the work I'm doing with my cohort colleagues is around how do we know what we know, and how do we come to know? And we can use some very creative processes to really tap into things like intuition. Now, whether we want to say it's there or not, whether we want to say actually, does that come with a data set? Can we measure it? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I think there is, it's there, but our responsibility is to challenge it. We can use it and we can have it, but just to say, I don't know, I'm basing this on intuition. If there's death and destruction, that's not good enough. So our job is to challenge it, to take it. A friend of mine always calls it, that we've got to take it out, put it on the balcony and hit it with a baseball bat or a cricket bat. Our job is to test it and push it and just challenge it, so that when it happens in the moment, and we are at a push comes to shove moment, and we can go, I don't know what I'm basing this on, but my intuition is telling me this. We have a good idea of whether our intuition is on the money or near enough to the money, or is intuition wishful thinking, or driven by a want to look good, or whatever is the second or third layer.
Do you know that we've been speaking for nearly 55 minutes?
It has just gone so fast. I as you said that, I glanced and I cannot believe that 55 minutes has just gone. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, what would be your final advice, or to help people think about developing their self-awareness, their trust, what would you say?
Oh, that's a really good question. What would I want for people? That it's worth the effort. So what you're saying about some discipline.
Yeah.
I'm not generally a disciplined person. Like, it's not something that comes naturally to me. I'm much more sort of spontaneous and, that's shiny, off I go. But with the discipline, it's almost like it became rewarding because of what comes out. So for me, the free fall writing is one way. The experiments is another way. but actively treating yourself as a project to kind of go, what do I know and how do I know? And through the discipline creates opportunities for experience and reflection, and you will always learn something. And therefore, the next time you're kind of like, I'm gonna do something else to. So unless you're, give it a go, actively experiment and try out and reflect. And as I say, free fall writing for me, and the rules, not the rules, but the guidelines. Put pen to paper, write, keep writing. If you run out of things to write, I'm running out of things to write, until you think again, until the next thought comes. If you have a random thought, a seemingly random thought, write about that. Let the pen do the work. 10 minutes. That's it. Grab yourself a coffee. But especially if something happens that makes you kind of go, oh, that made me feel, what was that? And just like, I think what was going on there was ... and let the pen do the work. And I'm almost always surprised. Sometimes it just feels, you can move into a bit of, and then I did this and then I did that. But nearly always, especially when I write in the morning, because I know I have insight overnight, I'm always, and I've now started writing when I'm having brand new thoughts, where I'm connecting something that I've never connected before, but my brain has it back there somewhere, and it might be an anecdote or a memory pops up, and I write into that, and then it's like, of course, that and that. It's so much so that, I would be, this is my evidence. If I could just hand my journal over for my PhD, I would love to do that. But I think you have to do a bit of framing around it. I think they like that.
That's brilliant. I mean, mine would be, first of all, make an appointment with yourself. Yeah. Just take that time, because it's a choice, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And facing yourself with all your doubts and that inner voice and this intuition and everything we've spoken about, it's quite courageous to do that, because you're opening you're opening a space that might make you feel uncomfortable to start with.
Very much.
Because it will shake things and it will challenge your mindset and your habits, and
yes,
like, who do you think you are to be doing that? And okay, that's great. So if people want to contact you, Trudy, to talk to you about your research or books, or how can they contact you?
This I got somebody else was recently. I said, I think you can Google me, and then after I said it, I was just like, oh God, that sounds so arrogant. But yes, I mean, by all means, contact me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm in all the sort of normal places that you might find business people that think about this stuff for a living. Okay. But I would love it, because I'm just endlessly fascinated by it, and it seems to work. Whatever I'm doing here, it's working out in my practice, and that is fascinating, because you can see the people I'm working with going, as they're finding out about themselves, and the so what.
Yes.
The so what for them, for their everyday choices that ultimately lead to a better quality of life. I think I not just aspire, I feel confident that it does.
Yeah, and also peacefulness with yourself. Like, you're not fighting all the time. It's kind of a zen.
The word that I have find myself coming back to it is liberation.
Yes, freedom.
It's liberation.
Yes. David is saying, really enjoyed this. Thank you. Very thought-provoking. Oh, thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Yes, good. Okay. Trudy, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much.
I feel the same. Because I was having a little love-in. It's very nice.
Thank you very much, Trudy.
No, thank you. Take care, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.